they were having trouble finding a bank that was willing to loan them money. Translation: their loan request was denied, rejected.
Have you heard that the Chicago Sky's application for a $38 million bank loan was denied? The banks reportedly declared she's not worth the investment after taking a look at Angel Reese. Here's where it gets crazy. Forbes recently released a piece asserting that Angel Reese, not Caitlin Clark, is to blame for the WNBA's expansion. This is completely insane and demonstrates precisely what these financial organizations truly think about the WNBA's biggest social media star. Are they serious now? Let's examine why banks aren't purchasing the products that Forbes and the Sky are offering, as well as the implications for the franchise that is presently operating in a YMCA.
Information from a viewer on Twitter. Last summer, the Chicago Bravado proudly announced plans to build a state-of-the-art practice facility. As you guys know, due to severe financial constraints, or as normal people would call it, being broke, WNBA teams usually practice at the local YMCA, where they share half the court with prepubescent boys.
Yes, that's correct. It is not a temporary situation during a facility renovation. Rather, the Chicago Sky, a professional WNBA team, are holding practices at local YMCAs. This is their daily reality. Just think of it for a moment. Elite female basketball players don't even have a regular training location.
Local LGBT is booked for the day. Practices are often moved to the driveway of unsuspecting neighbors who aren't home because they're work.
Imagine elite athletes waiting for youth league to clear the court or attempting to train in gyms without locker rooms, recovery equipment, or consistent court standards. The Chicago Sky, a professional WNBA team with star power like Angel Reese, frequently shares space with community programs and kids' camps, and occasionally they are even forced to hide their training locations out of embarrassment. This isn't a temporary solution. It's their norm, and it's seriously hurting them.
Chicago Bravado were having a difficult time finding a consistent place to practice. And if you've ever seen the Chicago Bravado play pretend basketball, it is painfully obvious that practice isn't something that they do on a regular basis.
This degree of unpredictability is a clear indication of more serious financial problems rather than merely being inconvenient. The public perception of Sky may be strong and worthy of a headline, but behind the scenes, they're scurrying to locate a practice space. No NBA team would be expected to operate in this manner, even though G League teams have better facilities. These players should have access to expert resources rather than makeshift fixes. Not only is the scenario unprofessional, it is intolerable, but this is where the Chicago Sky issues worsen.
Having difficulties finding places to practice, the Bravado decided that they would build a state-of-the-art practice facility. But there was just one problem, one tiny problem. The Chicago Bravado, they did not have the money to build the facility, but that's okay. That's okay. Since the WNBA is used to receiving sympathy money, since the WNBA believes they're entitled to money they haven't earned, they figured they could just go down to the sympathy bank and ask for a...
The team decided to pursue a $38 million loan to build a state-of-the-art practice facility in Bedford Park after realizing that there were insufficient practice spaces. This wasn't just any facility, though. We're talking about a custom-built WNBA performance center that spans over 40,000 square feet and has exclusive space for the team and staff. The plan was ambitious, with groundbreaking initially scheduled for this fall and completion set for December 2025.
As in, they had the mock-ups for this huge, great facility without the money for the facility.
However, a startling event occurred that the mainstream sports media refuses to discuss. When the Chicago Sky approached those banks with their proposal, they were flatly rejected. Can you imagine that banks whose entire business model is centered around lending money looked at the Chicago Sky plan and said, "No thanks"? The way that financial institutions perceive the true market value of the Chicago Sky and their purported superstar Angel Reese is shown by this rejection, which wasn't just any rejection.
Please give us this sympathy money. We have Angel Reese. She's a huge star. Dozens of people bought tickets last year to witness her mythical streak of double-doubles. We promise to pay you back within the next 200 or 300 years.
Consider what must have transpired throughout those sessions. The executives of Sky most likely arrived with ostentatious presentations that included Angel Reese's Instagram following, media appearances, and claims that she drew large crowds. They probably assured the banks that having Rhea on the roster would bring in enough money to easily repay the $38 million loan, but the banks weren't buying it. Let's put this in perspective. To you and I, $38 million might seem like a lot, but in the world of professional sports, it's almost pennies. Some NBA players earn that much in just 1 or 2 seasons.
A $38 million loan for a professional sports team, that should be approved without hesitation. And that's what the WNBA is, right? The WNBA is professional basketball.
The bank's rejection of a $38 million loan for a professional team in the third largest city in America is a stark reminder of how they see the Chicago Sky's potential for revenue. Despite the media hoopla, financial analysts that just consider return on investment, ROI, don't think Angel Reese is compelling enough to warrant the investment. They conclude that the enthusiasm doesn't translate into actual, bankable funds.
According to documentation from the village of Bedford Park, the Chicago Bravado, they were having trouble finding a bank that was willing to loan them money. Translation? Their loan request was denied, rejected. So they went to the city council in Bedford Park, begging them to front the money for the facility. Not only did they want the taxpayers to front the money, they also wanted the loan to be interest-free.
The Chicago Sky sought full interest-free funding for their facility from the village of Bedford Park after being rejected by banks. A meeting on December 12th showed how desperate the team had become, with officials mentioning their difficulties obtaining funding. When a franchise seeks assistance from a small village, it's a serious red flag. The project's timeframe has already been moved from October 2025 to April 2026, but considering their financial difficulties, even that seems improbable.
Possibly by the start of next season, it's not happening by April 2026. The fact that, like, well, it's just not by this date, maybe by this other date in the quite far future, but yeah, it looks like it's an almost certainty that, it's just not going to be, it's not going to be there in the year of 2020.
The most striking difference between Angel Reese's media representation and her actual financial impact is that, although headlines portray her as the face of the WNBA's expansion, banks based on hard data, not Instagram followers, clearly don't buy it. They looked at actual metrics like attendance, merchandise sales, and revenue forecasts and discovered that, in their opinion, the Chicago Sky's projections fell short of expectations. This circumstance reveals a fundamental reality in professional sports. Financial companies worry about dollars, not likes. Thus, social media buzz does not equate to income. There are major concerns raised by their choice and the Sky's abrupt turn to look for village funding. The squad wouldn't be vying for public funds if Reese's star power was as bankable as the media claims. The mathematics just don't add up.
I genuinely just think that they are just way too... we're way too ambitious on this. And look, I don't think long-term it's going to really affect the Sky. The on-the-court stuff is mainly what's going to...
The fact that this loan rejection occurred during what many consider to be a peak in the popularity of women's basketball, the WNBA has been seeing a rise in viewers and attention, suggests that banks did not view the Chicago Sky as a secure investment, indicating that they do not think the team, even with Angel Reese, will profit enough from this upsurge to warrant the loan.
Social media impressions do not equate to popularity.
The million was only for a practice facility, not a huge arena. The fact that banks wouldn't even finance this very small investment by professional sports standards shows how poorly they view the Sky's revenue potential, as many collegiate programs have training facilities that cost as much as or more.
Considering the fact it is not started yet, and they didn't get a loan. They did not get approved for the loan.
The Chicago Sky suffered a financial loss as well as a much larger fantasy that was promoted by the media, but the story is far from done because this is where things start to get interesting.
Genuinely looking like they're now just in a situation where it's going to happen. Like they're looking for they can't get a loan. They're looking for the city to approve it. And it looks like the city are going to approve it. But it's just not going to be ready early enough. And I just think they were too ambitious. I think they were way too ambitious, being like, it's going to be done in a year. They were genuinely said they would have it ready.
Forbes magazine recently released what may be the most deceptive sports journalism of the year, asserting that Angel Reese is solely to blame for the WNBA's expansion. However, when was the last time you saw someone use Instagram likes to pay their bills?
Premise of this article from Forbes, it was trying to convince us that Caitlin Clark was not the only one responsible for elevating the WNBA dump. Matter of fact, Forbes tries to convince us that Angel Reese is more popular than Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers combined.
Forbes proudly declared that Angel Reese is more influential than Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers because she has more Instagram followers, which is precisely what they were trying to sell us. The ridiculous notion that social media followers are somehow the best indicator of an athlete's worth. Are you serious? Since when did double taps on selfies result in real money?
Evidence was provided for this flawed and obviously false theory. Angel Reese has more Instagram followers.
This type of cursory examination totally ignores the fundamental factors that influence sports economics. In the business world, social media impressions are literally the definition of fool's gold. They may appear impressive and shiny at first, but try taking them to the bank, which is exactly what the Chicago Sky tried to do. Those banks weren't impressed by follower counts. Instead, they were looking for tangible cash flow potential.
What the hell does that have to do with anything? I didn't even know that Caitlin Clark was on Instagram. It's not surprising that Angel Reese has more Instagram followers. If I had to guess, most of her following consists of lonely men who are patiently waiting for another provocative picture to be uploaded so they can commence spanking the
What's also telling is that Forbes carefully omitted any reference to the television ratings of Unrivaled, which starred Angel Reese, from their piece. Why omit that important metric? Probably because those figures would undermine their meticulously crafted story. Instead of Instagram filters and TikTok dances, league revenue is driven by television viewership and advertising dollars.
Unrivaled received a lot of those social media impressions because they paid for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. They should be paying to advertise the league. But having hundreds of millions of impressions, that does not mean that people are actually paying attention.
Let's now discuss events occurring outside of social media bubbles in the real world. Even with Angel Reese's alleged star power, the Chicago Sky were unable to fill their arena. In a space that can accommodate over 10,000 people, about 8,700 tickets were sold. Empty seats don't bring in money, they don't impress sponsors, and they most definitely won't persuade banks to provide $38 million.
That wasn't how many people were actually in the arena, and I'm supposed to believe that Angel Reese is responsible for elevating and growing the WNBA?
Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever went from being a league afterthought to becoming the most watched team in WNBA history almost overnight. This isn't hyperbole. It's supported by real broadcast numbers, ticket sales, and merchandise revenue. When Clark plays, millions of people watch, and when she visits other arenas, they sell out. These are real financial metrics that banks understand, not vanity statistics from social media. Forbes wants us to think that Angel Reese's Instagram following is what is driving the WNBA's growth, but the financial institutions that make a living by analyzing revenue potential looked at those claims and said, "We're not buying it." The stark contrast between perception and reality couldn't be more apparent. In a literal sense,
can't force it. You have to allow it to build organically, because if you don't, if you continue forcing it on people, it's going to backfire. Just like it backfired last season. The media can lie. They can pretend that all of these other players are responsible for elevating the league, but no one believes it. And you're not doing the WNBA any favors by diminishing the only star in the league.
What we're witnessing is a last-ditch effort by some media outlets to impose a narrative that just doesn't align with economic reality. They're attempting to persuade us that social media engagement and follower counts somehow matter more than real butts, seats, and eyes on screens. But the one rejection brutally cuts through all of that noise. Construction expenditures are not covered by Instagram followers. The WNBA was fortunate to be featured on major sports networks prior to Caitlin Clark's arrival, and now they're breaking viewership records week after week. The entire conversation surrounding women's basketball has changed fundamentally, not because of social media celebrities, but rather because of Clark's incredible talent, which attracted millions of new fans who had never watched a WNBA game before. This is painfully obvious to anyone watching women's basketball this season.